Hello, and the purpose of this video is to elaborate on the epistemological grounding statement for Season 2 of this channel, which I titled Epistemology 2. And this video is, what I elaborate on in this video is an update on the two videos that I made elaborating on the epistemological basis of the first season. And there have been many changes in my views since I launched the first season back in November. Well, the channel was officially launched on November 11, but I started recording content as far back as October 1st of 2021. But anyways, when I made the first epistemological grounding statements for this channel, first of all, they were contextualized by anti-cult, which is something I've moved away from in the second season. And second of all, those epistemological statements contained a number of sort of leaps into a speculation that were now in retrospect I've reconsidered and I've modified. Right. My views now in terms of philosophy. Of the philosophy and that grounds the work in this channel has changed in the sense that it has become more pragmatic. So yeah, and less speculative and more pragmatic, more grounded in what actually is rather than what I wish could be. So I am going to look at, okay, so let's look here, go over Epistemology 2. First, to define epistemology. And all the definitions and factual information is derived from encyclopedias online, such as mostly Wikipedia, but also Encyclopedia Britannica, both Wikipedia and Encyclopedia Britannica is what I consulted the most to have the factual definitions. And the reason I consulted those encyclopedias is because encyclopedias usually contain very concise and definitions in plain language, which is what I want. So yeah. So and the links to the resource material in Encyclopedia Britannica and Wikipedia will be published in the description. Links to everything. So anyways, epistemology is defined as theories related to the nature, origin, and scope of knowledge, right? And I subscribe to epistemic relativism, which is the view that what is true, rational, or justified for one person need not be true, rational, or justified for another person, right? So it admits to subjectivity, the multi-perspectivism and subjectivity. And I also look at constructivism, and epistemic constructivism emphasizes the process of, quote, how humans construct knowledge, right, end quote. So the construct of knowledge, how is that put together? I guess in the sciences they use empirical methods and testing, etc. With political theory, theology, journalism, historiography is a more subjective process, because in those fields it is a mixture of objectivity and subjectivity. So yeah, but yeah, so epistemic constructivism emphasizes the process of how humans construct knowledge, right? A Hindi epistemological tradition independent of the Western philosophical tradition is called Pramana, right? Pramana can be translated as, quote, instrument of knowledge, end quote, and it refers to various sources of knowledge held to be a priori reliable, right? And then there is Buddhist epistemology, which has been compared to empiricism in the sense that it was based on the experience of the world through the senses. The Buddha taught that empirical observation through the six sense fields, or ayatanas, was the proper way of verifying any knowledge claims, right? Yeah, so empirical observation through six a priori predefined fields is what would result in the verification of any knowledge claims. So that is the Buddhist process, right? And in the playlist there is this I would really recommend, it's a series of lectures by a professor in the University of Edinburgh, Professor Priest, I think is his name, and he talks about all this Buddhism science and the epistemology, formal logic, etc., etc. He explores all these issues there, like a Buddhist perspective on science. So please, in the playlist, is towards the end of the playlist is there. Graham Priest is the name of the professor. So by all means, please look at his lectures. He is the one I look at. Like those lectures that he published are like lectures that I find like very, very like grounding to my philosophical views. So yeah. So you might want to look at what he has to say. It's really insightful. And again, it's all in the playlist. So. Theology, political theory, journalism, historiography are narratives that mix subjective interpretations and selective inclusion of objective facts. In the case of journalism and historiography, there is the issue of the editorial process. A subjective editorial actor decides what information is to be included and what information is to be excluded from the journalistic or historical narrative. Okay? And when you crop the picture, you tell a lie, right? And there's a famous quote by the chief editor of the New York Times, that the New York Times reserves the right to not publish, and that is a right they exercise often. And I mean, when you crop the picture, as I said, you tell a lie. So, I mean, the New York Times was the mirror image of Pravda in the Soviet Union, basically. And Pravda is, Pravda, of course. I mean, truth, right? Yeah. The saying in the Soviet Union apparently was, there is no truth in Pravda and no news in Izvestia, So Pravda was the opposite of truth, but it was called truth, right? Like from everything from falsified statistics to like censorship of what was happening, etc. Yeah, and that all this reminded me of a quote by Gore Vidal. Gore Vidal wrote a novel in which he used William Randolph Hearst as a character, and he wrote in that novel, "True history," said Hearst, with a smile that was for once almost charming, "is the final fiction. I thought even you knew that," right? So true history is the final fiction, right? Because the assumption here is that history is just a subjective. I mean, it's like what Howard Zinn talks about in People's History. Why did Howard Zinn put together People's History? Because white male heterosexual historians in the academic establishment in the United States for years and years only spoke of the experience of white men in American history, excluding the experiences and perspectives of women, blacks, LGBT persons, Indians, Mexicans, whatever. All those people were excluded from the narrative. So then Howard Zinn came up with People's History to like bring those stories that were suppressed into light. And again, the editorial process, right? The white supremacist historians would erase from the picture the experiences and voices of non-white populations or non-male, the women and the non-whites. So yeah. Let's see, that takes me to ethics. Ethics is a branch of philosophy that involves systematizing, defending, and recommending concepts of right and wrong behavior. And as far as ethics, my position is that there exist competing systems of ethics relative to cultural and historical context, influenced by religious and political views. Okay, so there is not one universal ethics. No. It is true. It's a branch of philosophy that involves systematizing, defending, and recommending concepts of right and wrong behavior, but those recommendations are, biased according to cultural and historical context and influenced by religious and political views. So there are certain Christian congregations who believe in very strict systems of right and wrong versus more liberal ones that don't. So, you know what I mean? There is different ethical systems within Christendom, for example. That brings me to Western formal logic. Concepts such as A equals A, an object will always equals itself, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, right? In Western formal logic. And Professor Graham Priest spends a lot of time exploring this issue, contrasting Buddhist versus Western logic, right? So by all means, please watch Professor Priest's presentation. He talks a lot about, he issues a critique of Western formal logic coming out of Buddhism, but there is also a critique of Western formal logic coming out of Marxist dialectics, right? Because according to Marxist dialectics, there is no such thing as a moment. Everything is ceasing to be and becoming. So the concept of A equals A is questionable. And a paradox. A paradox is a logically self-contradictory statement or a statement that runs contrary to one's expectation. It is a statement that, despite apparently valid reasoning from true premises, leads to a seemingly self-contradiction or a logically unacceptable conclusion. A paradox usually involves contradictory yet interrelated elements that exist simultaneously or persist over time. And that is correct. How a paradox exists in nature, right? So, yeah. And there are certain explanations of quantum mechanics that factor paradox. So, and if it is true that reality is quantum mechanical, then paradox is part of that reality, right? So, how does Western formal logic, pan out in that situation, right? Metaphysics, ontology, philosophical questions about the nature of reality or existence or being are considered under the rubric of ontology, which is a major branch of metaphysics in the Western philosophical tradition. So yeah, I consider metaphysics by way of being concerned or interested in questions about the nature of reality or existence or being, right? I'm very much interested in those questions. What is reality? What is existence? And what is being, right? So in that sense, I engage in metaphysics. Right. And then there is theories of there are several theories. Speaking about reality, I mean, there is not just one theory of reality. There are several theories of reality. So there's at least 3 theories of time-space reality. Presentism holds that the past and future are unreal and only an ever-changing present is real. The block universe theory, also known as eternalism, holds that past, present, and future are all real, but the passage of time is an illusion. The growing block universe theory holds that past and present are real, but the future is not. And personally, I subscribe to presentism, okay, which holds that the past and future are unreal and only an ever-changing present is real. So yeah, only the present exists. Past and future have no objective existence. That is my premise. And the reason why I question whether there can be an objective history or an objective historiography is precisely because because the past has no objective existence. So any narrative of historiography or history that is put together is really put together in the present, not the past. So those narratives of history. And it applies to journalism too, because journalism is also concerned with the recent past, right? Or current events. The immediate past. The immediate past has no objective existence. So, journalism and historiography are the pretense that there could be an objective journalism and an objective history is undermined by what I consider to be a fact that the past has no objective existence. Okay, however, there is the block universe theory, also known as eternalism, which holds that past, present, and future are all real, but the passage of time is an illusion. I mean, if past, present, and future are all real, that means they exist simultaneously, right? So then the problem with eternalism for me is, okay, fine, past, present, and future exist simultaneously, great. That means that, are there 3 me's here, three versions of me, in the space-time continuum at all times, and when whoever I am now enters the future me becomes the true me, or which one of the 3 is the true me? See, and that's the problem. Okay, then the notion of individuality, in the sense of cogito ergo sum, collapses in this eternalism. Maybe eternalism is the truth. Maybe eternalism is the truth, and I'm afraid of the implications. Maybe, But look, I choose to hold on to presentism. Yeah, I rather not dwell too much on eternalism, because if you dwell too much on eternalism, the implications of eternalism are, very, very radical, and I really don't want to go there. I want to retain a sense of sanity here. You know what I mean? And I see the block universe theory as a compromise between the eternalism and presentism. What is reality? Reality is the sum or aggregate of all that is real or existent within a system, as opposed to that which is only imaginary. And reality is the sum or aggregate of all that is real or existence within a system, as opposed to that which is only imaginary. When I read that, it made me think about Machiavelli, the Prince, the quote where he says that the man who pursues what ought to be rather than what is will meet his downfall, right? So, it made me think about that. But and also the whole issue of idealism versus materialism in Marxism, in Marxist theory, in Marxist philosophy, in dialectical materialism, the whole issue of idealism versus realism. And in another video, one of these Mormon worker videos, I said that I'm a stubborn utopian, right? And I am a stubborn utopian, but I understand too that utopia has no material basis, right? For socialism, scientific socialism, to exist, it has to have a material basis, right? So it's something to that effect. But ontological questions also feature in diverse branches of philosophy, including the philosophy of science, philosophy of religion, philosophy of mathematics, and philosophical logic. These include questions about whether only physical objects are real, physicalism, whether reality is fundamentally immaterial, idealism, whether hypothetical unobservable entities posited by scientific theories exist, just paradox, whether God exists, whether numbers and other abstract objects exist, and whether possible worlds exist. So there's all sorts of issues here with the ontological questions, metaphysical issues, etc. Whether God exists is something I'm going to come to later, because I believe that each person needs to answer the question, does your theory of reality include or exclude God? Because that God is a scientific hypothesis, so you need to answer that. Whether hypothetical unobservable entities posited by scientific theories exist, whether God exists, whether numbers and other abstract objects exist, and whether possible worlds exist. And this possible worlds thing is interesting too, because I am a fan of science fiction, and there's actually a genre of historical fiction called what if, and it is in that type of historical fiction, is not fictional stories about historical events, but rather sort of like explorations of what could have happened if certain historical events had happened or not, right? What would have been the outcome, the alternate outcomes, the possible alternate outcomes in a given historical, trajectory. A classic one that I really like to consider is, what if, and during the Second World War, the Battle of Moscow, right, which took in real history, it took place between October 1941 and January 1942, right? It was the German operation to take Moscow was called Operation Typhoon, right? But by the time the Germans launched it in October 1941, it was too late. It should have been launched a lot earlier. And the reason it wasn't launched earlier is because Hitler diverted the tanks from Army Group Center to go. He told them to go down south and reinforce Army Group South effort to take Kiev, right? So apparently General Guderian was diverted south, and the generals complained about this. They said, we shouldn't do that. We should take Moscow now while it is there for the taking. We should focus on taking Moscow. But Hitler said no, because the Ukraine was a much more important economic objective in context of Operation Barbarossa, and so Hitler ordered the tanks down from Army Group Center to the south, which then delayed the attack on Moscow, and it gave Stalin time to prepare for to prepare the defense of Moscow, right? And apparently what happened was that the Richard Sorge spy network in Japan reassured Stalin that Japan had no intention of attacking Siberia, that the Japanese attitude towards Operation Barbarossa was wait and see, that if Moscow fell, maybe they would act to attack the Soviet Union, but not before that. So because of that, then Stalin diverted troops from Siberia to help reinforce the defense of Moscow, thus beating back Operation Typhoon. Now, in a what-if scenario that I really like is, what if Hitler had not diverted the tanks? What if Hitler had let Guderian march on Moscow earlier in 1941? And what if the Germans had taken Moscow? What would have happened then, you know? So that's one what if scenario that is really interesting to look at. Alternate outcomes for the Battle of Moscow, for example. So that is one of that is a type of it's fiction. It's just fiction. It's fiction. You know? Historical. Another type of historical fiction. It's metaphysical, but it's interesting. Sort of like it's a way of pondering as to the impact of historical events. You know. Anyways, back to reality. Scientific realism is at the most general level the view that the world, the universe described by science, perhaps ideal science, is the real world, as it is, independent of what we might take it to be. Right. And at prima facie, scientific realism sounds good. You know, scientific realism is at the most general level the view that the world, the universe described by science, perhaps ideal science, is the real world. In other words, only science can describe the real world. And by the real world, for example, they mean like, you know, they prefer, it has to be tested, you know. The theories have to be testable, you know. If it cannot be tested, you know, then it's not real science, it's philosophy. And there is some criticisms of string theory about that, but there's something else. Right, the real world as it is, independent of what we might take it to be, right? Yeah. The problem is, though, with this view is that it's too black and white, because it's too black and white, too fundamentalist, you know? And I keep thinking, at prima facie, this looks correct. Scientific realism is at the most general level the view that the world, the universe described by science, perhaps ideal science, is the real world, as it is, independent of what we might take it to be. Great, it sounds great, except that doesn't allow for gray, you know. And I know this is an irrational, superficial statement, but, you know, reality is not black and white. Reality is gray, okay? And again, paradox exists in nature. So does scientific realism accommodate that? I don't know. Could it? I don't know. Physics. My position is that physics is a reliable source of truth about reality, except that current understandings are subject to revision as new discoveries are made or new information is revealed. Okay, so yeah, physics is reliable. I think physics is pretty reliable, you know, as a source of truth about the nature of reality. Okay, great. But, you know, it's kind of like a dialectical situation with physics, because in Marxist dialectics, you know, everything is ceasing to be and becoming at all. Everything is ceasing to be and becoming at all times, and there is no such thing as a moment. So that applies to physics, right? There is no such thing as a moment where there is a total truth awareness, because current understandings are subject to revision as new discoveries are made. So yeah. So, but nevertheless, I consider that physics is reliable. You know. Oh yeah. The theory of reality I subscribe to includes God in the form of a non-existent creator, right? That's my personal view. And this comes from Australian philosopher Douglas Gasking, who was alive between 1911 and 1994, he developed a version of the ontological argument meant to prove God's non-existence. It was not intended to be it was not intended to be serious. It was a joke, right? If the universe is a product of an existent creator, we could conceive of a greater thing, one which does not exist. A non-existent creator is greater than one which exists. So God does not exist, right? So a non-existent creator is greater than one which exists. No? A creator that does not require existence is greater than the one who would. So that was Gaskin's premise. And again, this was a joke. But you know what? I take this joke seriously because I think this joke was onto something. Graham Oppie criticized the argument, viewing it as a weak parody of the ontological argument. He stated that although it may be accepted that it would be a greater achievement for a non-existent creator to create something than a creator who exists, there is no reason to assume that a non-existent creator would be a greater being. Okay, that's a good point. He continued by arguing that there is no reason to view the creation of the world as, quote, the most marvelous achievement imaginable, end quote. Finally, he stated that it may be inconceivable for a non-existent being to create anything at all. Yeah, okay. Okay, so it would be a greater achievement for a non-existent creator to create something than a creator who exists. However, there is no reason to assume that a non-existent creator would be a greater being. Perhaps. You know, like I said, I'm pragmatic here. So, you know, but yeah, God is a hypothesis. You know. Yeah. And yeah, I am post-Christian. You know, this is a post-Christian. I've just made post-Christian statements. I am not atheist, though. I am not atheist because I'm afraid of atheism. I'm afraid of the implications of atheism when it comes to like certain ethics. You know, I think there is room for. Look, you could have faith in Christianity without believing in God. Okay, that's my premise. So I'm post-Christian but not atheist. Okay, so what is my theological grounding? I maintain that the most important question of Christian theology is, what is the nature of Jesus Christ, right? So for me, the most important question of Christian theology is the Christological question. And there is such thing as a Christological spectrum. There are at least four different versions of Jesus, right? There are four different versions of Jesus, so pick your Jesus, right? There is the docetic Jesus, the phenomenon of Jesus, his historical and bodily existence, and above all, the human form of Jesus was mere semblance without any true reality, an illusion. And, I believe, there are certain apocryphal New Testament Gospels that suggest docetic ideas. I think one of them is the Gospel of Peter. But there is another one. I forgot the name of it. It's a more Gnostic apocalypse where Peter is standing before the crucified Jesus and he is weeping. And then next to the crucified Jesus appears Jesus and he is laughing. And he tells Peter, "Why are you crying? You know, I never suffered. It was all an illusion," or something to that effect. You know, so that's kind of like the docetic approach. It was all fake. It was all staged. The whole thing was staged. Jesus was never human. He was not. The appearance of the substance of Jesus was a mere illusion, right? Jesus only appeared to exist for our benefits, and he appeared to suffer, but he never really did, right? So, docetism. Yeah, a mere semblance without any true reality, an illusion. Okay, and one powerful argument in favor of Docetism is, I mean, the crucified Jesus, assuming that he was crucified, because some people there is the Jehovah's Witnesses believe he was nailed to a torture stake. Most of Christendom believe he was crucified, and a minority believes he was nailed to a tree. I am a proponent of the tree. I go with the tree. I think he was nailed to a tree, but that was just me. Right. If Jesus is God, which Docetics say Jesus is only divine, from their perspective, is the extreme opposite of Arianism. They say Jesus is only divine with no human side to him. The human side was just an illusion. He's only divine. So, of course, if God cannot die, right? So that's why they say this. Their solution is, I mean, God cannot die. So the solution, their logical conclusion is, well, then the whole thing was an illusion, right? That's Docetism. Then is the Nestorian Christology. And I used to be a sympathizer of Nestorianism, but I switched to Arianism, and I'll come to Arianism next. But I was originally more Nestorian than Arian, but I switched to Arianism. Okay, first, Nestorian Mariology rejects the title Theotokos, God bearer, for Mary, instead proposing the title Christotokos, right? Christotokos, which is Christ bearer, right? Christ bearer. Why? Because God does not have a mother, right? Because God has no beginning, so God does not have a mother. So to say that Mary is the Theotokos is a statement. It's a false statement, because God does not have a mother. God has no beginning and no end, right? So yeah, so you cannot say that Mary is the mother of God, and that has implications for the Christology, because then you cannot say that Jesus is entirely God. And it was one of the reasons Nestorius of Constantinople, who proposed Nestorianism, he was deposed because he was accused of Arianism. But he said he wasn't, and instead he came up with his own Christology that emphasized the distinction between divine and human aspects of the incarnation. Nestorian Christology promotes the concept of a prosopic union of two natures, divine and human, in Jesus Christ, thus trying to avoid and replace the concept of hypostatic union. This Christological position of Nestorianism is defined as radical diophysitism. Diophysitism. Radical diophysitism, right? He was two persons, the Son of Man and the Son of God, two persons, two separate persons united in purpose, right? So what was born of Mary was the Son of Man. What performed miracles was the Son of God. Who was nailed to the cross was the Son of Man. Who died was the Son of Man. Who ascended into heaven was the Son of God. That's Nestorianism. Again, it all goes down to the Mariological issue that Mary is not Theotokos, because God has no beginning. Rather, Mary is Christotokos, Christ bearer, and by Christ bearer is specifically the Son of Man, not the Son of God, which comes in during the baptism and exits after the crucifixion when he's, Father, in your hands I deposit my spirit, right? At that moment, the Son of God departs and leaves behind the body, or what? It's very complicated. Nestorianism is a complicated thing because it's two persons. There's two persons here. So yeah, radical diophysitism, and I used to be very much into Nestorianism, but I dropped Nestorianism because it's just too complicated. It's complicated, and it has all sorts of weird sort of implications for soteriology that if you pray to Jesus, which Jesus am I supposed to pray? The Son of Man or the Son of God? Because the ransom sacrifice was that of the Son of Man, not the Son of God, right? Because the Son of God cannot die. So that part of Jesus jettisoned the body when he was about to die. So, I mean, which Jesus saved me? See what so this is the problem of Nestorianism. It gets into all sorts of complicated issues. So look, I just became Arian, but let's see. A third Jesus is the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Jesus, which is the official Jesus of the Svenska kyrkan, Catholic Church, whatever, the official Jesus, right? The Pentecostals, Ecumenia Kyrkan, all these churches, they assume Niceno-Constantinopolitan, right? Which was formulated, this concept of Jesus was put together between 325 and 381 AD. And it's basically the usual, one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of the Father before all worlds or eons, right? Begotten of the Father before all worlds, right? So the only begotten Son of God. Of the essence of the Father, very important. Of the essence of the Father, consubstantial. Defines God as being one God existing in three co-equal, co-eternal, consubstantial divine persons, God the Father, God the Son, Jesus Christ, and God the Holy Spirit. So three distinct persons sharing one homoousion, essence, right? And that's consubstantiality. The Mormons reject this, and so do Jehovah's Witnesses, by the way, and so do I. Restorationism, Christian primitivist restorationism, rejects the doctrine of the Trinity because this doctrine of three co-equal, co-eternal, consubstantial divine persons did not exist in the first century congregation, and that's verifiable. Neither, there were two first century congregations. There was the Apostolic congregation and the Judeo-Christian congregation. This doctrine of the Trinity, as explained in these councils of Nicaea, Constantinople, what have you, consubstantial, three co-equal, co-eternal, and consubstantial divine persons did not exist in the first century congregation. Okay, certainly not the Judeo-Christians, because they saw Jesus as a rabbi, as an enlightened rabbi, and the Apostolic congregation, they had no conception of the Trinity. For them, God was one. So, yeah. So that's why restorationism breaks with the Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed. And and my commitment is to Christian primitivist restorationism. I do not accept the councils of Nicaea and Constantinople. I reject those councils. So do the Mormons. Well, the Mormons, you need to ask the Mormons, but I know for a fact that Jehovah's Witnesses do. I need to ask them. You would need to ask the Mormon missionaries about what the position of the Mormon Church is relative to the councils of Nicaea and Constantinople. But Mormons have their own version of the Trinity, which is the Mormon version of the Trinity is premised upon a critique of modalism. So their version of the Trinity is not exactly, they don't believe in consubstantiality. So it's a different version of the Trinity. So the Mormon Jesus is actually a fifth Christology that I'm not covering here. I'm only covering the classical Christologies. But the Mormon Jesus is a fifth position, a fifth Jesus. Right. Dogmatic condemnation of all shades of Arianism. That was very important for these two councils, and that's why I reject them, because I subscribe to the Christology of Arianism. There was a dogmatic condemnation of all shades of Arianism. Quote, but those who say there was a time when he was not, and he was not before he was made, and he was made out of nothing, or he is of another substance or essence, or the Son of God is created, or changeable, or alterable, they are condemned by the Holy Catholic Apostolic Church, right? So Arianism and Arianism was critical thinking applied against the doctrine of the Trinity. Okay, and that obviously that was anathemized. In other words, you're not allowed to criticize the Trinity, right? You're supposed to accept the Trinity. And then and then in the Radical Reformation, you had Michael Servetus, who wrote a book, De Trinitatis Erroribus, and he was burnt at the stake in 1553 for that. I mean, back then in 1550, you couldn't go around saying, I don't believe in the Trinity. That was a serious offense. That was probably against the law, a death penalty, right? What happened to him. So I mean, the doctrine of the Trinity has been enforced through terror, through like inquisitional terror and like execution and what have you, and violence. Finally, Arianism. Arianism is the one I subscribe to. I am committed to Arianism, and I am committed to Arianism in context of commitment to Christian primitivist restoration. I agree with the goal of the restoration of the first century congregation, the ecclesiology, theology to as much as possible of the first century congregation in the here and now. Why? Because the first century congregation is the purest form of original Christianity, is the original article, before it became corrupted and transformed into something different by the Roman state, when it hijacked the first century congregation and turned it into the Catholic Church, an arm of the Roman state. So, is there like an anarchist, bias in this whole thing? Yes. Am I hostile to the Roman state? Yes. Am I hostile to the idea of a state co-opting a congregation and turning it into an arm of itself? Yes. Why? Because I am against the state, right? And that's fine. That is okay to be against the state. I don't have to like the state, I can be an anarchist. I'm perfectly entitled to being an anarchist, It's a perfectly valid political position or anti-political position. So yeah.